Yep, there you are.
Oh.
So, let's get into it. Thanks for joining us here today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And I wanted to start off with just kind of going back to where you were in life when you started looking into UFOs and why you decided to tackle that.
That was in the 70s, and I was in the business of audio and video. I had a company that rented measurement equipment, signal processing equipment, oscilloscopes, real-time analyzers, and I had that for a couple years in the mid-70s. And then I started one of the country's leading rock and roll touring companies, Sound and Lights, trucks, touring around doing that, but you don't tour in the winter. And we were doing some pretty well-known bands, Three Dog Night, Moody Blues, and many others. And you don't tour in the winter. You look for other things to do. And with the equipment that we had, that included generators and that measurement equipment and lighting equipment, we worked in the film industry. And Arizona became our winter headquarters because it was a winter headquarters for B movies. So in the winter of 1978, I met Socrates Ballas. He was producing a movie on the Shroud of Turin. And it's the one that's out that's narrated by Richard Burton. And when they were in pre-production, they were looking for someone who could make some interface equipment so that the scientific iridium equipment could convert those images and scientific measurements to film. We were working on that project that winter, and Socrates Ballas introduced us to another filmmaker named John Stefanelli. John Stefanelli was working with APRO in Tucson to develop a method for analyzing pictures. So John Stefanelli introduced us to Jim Lorenzen and Wendell Stevens to see if, because of our approach in the way that we had worked on his project, that perhaps we would develop a method for APRO on analysis of UFO pictures. And I agreed to do that, since it would take about a year, I said, to find out the processes, the equipment, the manufacturers, the software, the techniques that would be a repeatable method to do that.
And APRO, just so people know, was the Association of, or no, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
Yes, and at that time it was a worldwide organization with representatives from most every country in the world, and it was an academic organization.
Yep. What NICAP, APRO, and CUFOS, the ones started by Hynek, were pretty much the big ones to begin with.
Yes.
Before they all kind of faded out, and MUFON became the forefront.
Yes. I traveled with Wendell Stevens occasionally that year to go to big image processing trade shows. And the goal was to find the equipment manufacturers, find out from the manufacturers who owned their equipment that we could go to as service providers in order to determine a repeatable method, create a method. And what are the issues? To analyze pictures of unknown objects. What's their size? How far away from the camera are they? Have they been superimposed? Are they a scale model? And all of the issues that would be related to that. And I published a paper on that, a white paper on that process in 1979 at the annual APRO conference that year. Subsequently, I was asked if we would analyze 40 pictures out of APRO's collection, which included the Billy Meyer pictures.
What was the feeling of the APRO people back then about the Billy Meyer photos?
They had no position on it. It was, no position that I could interpret.
Okay.
My sense of it was that they had included some known models in the batch of 40 in order to determine the success of the testing process. And at that time, the process was a sequence of different labs to go to. There wasn't a place other than Ground Saucer Watch that tested UFO pictures, and in fact, Ground Saucer Watch went to a particular manufacturer and did it there. We went to that facility also. Mm-hmm. And my goal was to develop a repeatable process and be done with it. Mm-hmm. But for the 2 years that I was supervising that process, the labs all signed, and we had them sign non-disclosure agreements, mm-hmm. which means we won't talk about the fact that we're coming here, and you won't talk about the fact that you even know us.
So how did you feel about getting involved with all of this at this point?
Well, you know, I had two hats that I wore. One was the rock and roll business, mm-hmm. and which is a business. It's a lot of fun, but it is a business. And the other was my scientific measurement business, mm-hmm. which was a precise and confidential business. Mm-hmm. So the combination of the two, I felt like the Blues Brothers on a mission from God, you know, to do some private analysis. So it was.
So you weren't opposed to it.
I wasn't opposed to it, but it was pro bono. Mm-hmm. There was no one to pay me to do it, nor did I ever ask for anyone to pay me to do it. In some of the cases were very costly once I got involved with it, with money out of pocket,
right?
Which a lot of people wouldn't know, you know, how much it really cost to send a few people running around doing things, but it would be tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Fortunately, I had cash flow from the music business in order to do that. Yes.
It's interesting too because Maurizio was a rock and roll writer to begin with. Mm-hmm. Nancy Talbot, who I had on, is very scientific minded now, used to work as a rock and roll producer. So lots of from rock and roll to UFOs.
And back.
Yeah.
Right. And the business continued successfully for many years, and we added other divisions. We added a computer graphics and animation service bureau in the late 80s, and we set up shop inside of Arizona State University at the Computer Institute, which I was one of the founders of. Mm. So out there in the real world, our work was very well known. It was given high levels of scientific credibility. Meanwhile, over in the UFO community, we were the target for hand grenades. So I was always reticent to go over into the UFO community and spend a lot of time there explaining what we were doing, because very few people ever wanted to see the scientific reports or the analysis or the techniques of the way we did it, which was based on forensic methods.
I guess it's kind of like when you're driving your car. Like for me, I'm not a mechanical type of person. I don't want to know what's going on under the hood.
Yes.
As long as it's working. So probably a lot of people are like that. I know in this field, a lot of people are like, tell me if it's real or not. I don't know the technical details about what you're doing with that photo. I just want to know if it's real or not.
Yes, but in reality, you have to spend a lot of time analyzing it, because there's a lot of armchair skeptics that are going to say,
yeah,
what about this? What about that? And it can take many, many hours to analyze one photograph, particularly in the 70s and 80s when equipment was limited. A scanner was $80,000.
Wow.
Then the resolution, the software, the techniques of doing it were costly. But the issues, the fundamental issues then and now are still the same. How big is it? How far away is it? You know, is it a dust particle? Is it a flare? Is it a cloud? Is it an airplane light? And what are the characteristics to do that? So we built an extensive database of known objects. And when we have unknowns, we extract the data from the unknown, compare it to the database of knowns, try to get a match. Like fingerprints. You have a database of millions of fingerprints that are known,
Right.
You get a fingerprint that's unknown. You extract the data as best you can for the fingerprint that's left, and try to get a match. If you don't get a match, well, it's an unknown guy. If you don't get a match in analyzing the photographs, it's an unknown.
Right.
Unknown. Unknown doesn't mean it's an alien spacecraft. It means that we don't have a match in the database.
So, with the unknowns, how often were you finding lots of knowns with the APRO material?
Well, I don't know how to classify that as a lot of knowns. I mean, I would get knowns, I would get unknowns, I would get
I guess what
data.
was the ratio that you were finding with those?
In the APRO 40?
Mm-hmm.
I would say there was 20 that were unknown, 10 that were, or so, that were airplanes or light reflections. That was a key thing to determine the software, to determine if an object is light emitting or light reflecting.
Right.
It's round, okay? Is it a disc or is it an orb? Does it have curvature to it, or is it, I'm saying, is it a coin or is it a ball? Is it a disc or is it an orb? And I mean, many issues. And I went to lots and lots of experts, including Michael Malin, who years later is known as Richard Hoagland's nemesis. Yes,
right.
yes. But at the time, Michael Malin was working at Jet Propulsion Laboratory and working at Arizona State University, and was quite open-minded about testing the Billy Meyer photographs.
Interesting.
And he found no evidence of a hoax.
Yeah.
Couldn't find any evidence that it was a small model, and that's really what we were looking for then. Is this a small model, and what are the characteristics? And since we were looking at film, one of the things was if it was superimposed, that we would look for multiple grain patterns. And the multiple grain patterns show up in the image area, but would be different in the sprocket areas. Where the sprocket holes are in the film. Well, if you're superimposing images, you'll get two grain patterns in the square image area in the middle, but out in the sprocket area, which we were also analyzing, we would have other grain to look at. So in the Billy Meyer pictures that we looked at, second and third generation film is useful because we then have more grain patterns to look at to be able to see if there's more grain patterns in the image area than there is in the sprocket area. And never found that in the Billy Meyer case. And as the years went on, a lot of hearsay about so-and-so tested it and found it to be a hoax. No white papers ever written, but a lot of emotional power behind the skeptics saying, well, we proved it to be a hoax. Well, where? How? I mean, what? Show me the testing.
Well, and that's how I feel about Billy Meyer. Everybody, it's such a heated, controversial debate. Yes. And I agree with you that a lot of people will say, that's easy to do. I can do it. But nobody's, without Photoshop, has demonstrated that they can do it or written up how they have discovered these things to be hoaxes, just like you're saying. I mean, if someone was able to write something up, do an analysis, show us with the technology they had back at the time how it could be done, that would be something different. But to my knowledge, and everywhere I've looked, even talking to the skeptics, nobody's done that. The biggest... There was someone just like last year who was reproducing some Billy Meyer photos, but he was using Photoshop. Yes. And he was saying, look, they're all fakes. I can do this with Photoshop.
Yeah, well, Photoshop didn't exist in the 70s when Billy took those pictures. I'm not an advocate or a promoter of the Billy Meyer case. I do analysis. Right. And I stand by my work of not being able to find evidence of a hoax or get a match. Doesn't mean that I'm authenticating the fact that it's an alien spacecraft. But out there in the rest of the world, the techniques that I use, I've been an expert witness in murder cases.